Good morning. It's a very cozy, rainy Bali morning. And today, what I would love to share is the importance of neutrality in doing energy work. So, I have trained in several different modalities. I also was born basically being able to kind of see and sense energy and having a connection with the other worlds. And so I spent a long time just trying to kind of make sense of this um, and also how other people approach, these more quote unquote invisible worlds. So one thing that I really learned and something that has really helped me in what I teach in my own energy trainings is, and this is actually from biodynamic craniosacral therapy. So there's there's biomechanical craniosacral therapy, and then there's biodynamic. And that also is kind of more influenced by the quantum field. So, the viewer, the subject, the viewer, the perception of the viewer will actually influence that which is being viewed or the object. So, that becomes the big question is how much influence does the perception of someone affect the field of that person being viewed? And so the initiation that we get to go through, when we're learning, energy work, and especially when I start to do like my first training is one, it's just opening up to like a whole new world. So, depending upon how you've learned, your conditioning, how you were schooled, it actually is kind of opening up your brain to a whole new level. And there is almost like that little orientation time of almost frustration. Especially if you're a higher achiever of like, I just want to get it. And also maybe having expectations of how energy should look or feel. A lot of people always want to be like, everyone wants to see it. And there's expectations about what it should look like. And that in itself, like the expectations that we have either of our own performance or how something should show up in someone else, that in itself gets to be a block, right? It actually prevents us from really seeing what's here. Because that's the real question that we're asking, both as we regard ourselves and as we regard the other. How are we truly seeing? How do we know it's real? How do we know when we're projecting? How do we know when we're actually seeing through our own wounds? So there's a lot of self-inquiry and self-knowledge and self-awareness that also is involved. If we're going to hold space for someone else, we have to be able to hold space for ourselves. That does not mean that you're like a perfect human, because what is a perfect human, right? Like if we're on earth plane, we're all learning, right? That's part of it. But it's having an awareness of, how do you know when someone else is grounded? Because the beauty is that the body heals itself when it's grounded and relaxed. But, if we have a history of trauma, that idea of ground and relaxation, that might be like something that we haven't experienced in a really long time. When I work with kids, they tend to, unless there's been a lot of trauma, kids tend to already be in their body. There's also like a connection to the subtle world that they haven't lost. So part of my work too is how to reclaim that magic that you had and how to start to trust these places that may not seem logical on some level, and aren't palpable like in a 3D way. But the more that you pay attention, the more you drop in, the more you get in your body, you start to see that what you thought was invisible or illogical actually is quite palpable and actually makes a lot of sense. I just love this work because, and you can see my enthusiasm, because there's always learning. But it also, to me, it's almost like your opportunity of, if I'm going to speak computer tech I'm not really a computer tech person. You'll know by this metaphor, but it's like, how do you go into the back end? It's like our experience of ourself in 3D world and our interaction with one another. That's kind of like the front end, right? But the back end, it's just like, well, what's really going on? Do we need to defrag something? Do we need to, is there a virus anywhere? What can we do in the back end? So as usual, I've gone on like an enthusiastic diatribe, but just going back to the beautiful initiation that we get if we work with energy, if you come and train with me and potentially with others, it's the importance of neutrality. And while it might seem easy, like, yeah, like, okay, I get, okay, I don't have an agenda. What is it like to not have an agenda, right? Not having an agenda with yourself, to not put pressure on yourself, and to not have an agenda on someone else. And what happens is that when you start to pay attention to someone else's energy field, if what we're really looking at is how can I create safety for someone else, and how can I meet them at the level that they're ready to be met, then to be soft and slow in the approach and really listening to their boundaries, which is something that's truly palpable. You can feel it. You can see it. You can sense it. Like we all have, there's more than just 5 senses. The Native Americans say that we have 13, but there's ways that you can sense where someone's boundary is, and how do you just wait there and not push through, but just wait and wait for it to kind of soften and dissolve. That in itself will give a really deeper possibility for a meeting. Because, the difference if you're talking to someone, and let's say you're feeling challenged. Let's say you're having a challenge in your life. And there's a really big difference between sitting down with them and just feeling like they're here for you. They're listening. They're not going to interrupt. They don't already have an idea of like, oh, I know what you need, or this is what's best for you. It's like they're really going to listen and respond, and maybe even ask questions in response to that. And even trusting that maybe you've got some wisdom in your own system that you momentarily forgot. And maybe just in the process of listening and in being with you and following you, that you can also reclaim your power again. So it is, and that difference of if you sit down and they're like, hey, you know what, I know what's best for you, and I'm going to fix you. That might create a contraction in your field. Because what we often forget is how powerful we are. And the big thing, it's like the Wizard of Oz. I love the Wizard of Oz metaphor, but it's like, we go on these big journeys and we're like, that great big ball of fire, like knows more than us and can fix everything and save the day. And part of it is like, oh, like I'm the savior of myself. Like I'm the one, I hurtled into this earth plane alone, and we're not alone. We've got all the guardians, we've got one another, community's important, and I'm going to hurtle out at some point, and you didn't just come here on this earth plane to like give your power away, right? Like you came here to remember your power and to like really express your gifts. And so when someone can give you the gift of you coming back to yourself, that's the greatest gift there is. Of realizing that there was nothing wrong with you, right? Like you can be challenged, you can make mistakes, you can be ashamed, but fundamentally there's nothing wrong with you. And then also you've got this, even in the hardest times, especially these past 2 years. They've been tough waves for the planet. All of us, no matter the circumstances, have felt like a level of anxiety, of fear, of despair, of hopelessness, of terror, of feeling trapped. Right? I mean, also there's been good things, but like there's a lot of new feelings that we didn't expect. And so how can we hold ourselves in this, and how can we hold one another? That's the real question. So if we look at in a really honest way of how can we listen and be neutral? Is there a power in not having an agenda? I in one of the practices with one of my students a couple of years ago, I remember we were doing like it was one of the first few days of us practicing. And the student she was practicing on was like, wow, I feel really uncomfortable. And we ended up having a chat afterwards, like, okay, so what was going on? The student that was practicing, that was holding space, that was the healer. I said, were you neutral? Like, what was your approach? Because her system seemed to really contract and really put up strong boundaries and just didn't want you in. What was going on? And she said, well, I just really wanted her to feel really good. And I just wanted her to have like feel really loved and a lot of light. And I just wanted it to be a really good feeling experience. Now, of course, that's not like a negative agenda, right? So I'm not saying like, that's not okay. There are instances where it's okay. But in the nature of this work, in the initial practice of, before I decide what you need right now, can I get myself out of the way? You're still going to be grounded. You're not dismissing yourself, but can I get myself out of the way? And can I really take some time and just listen to what's here? What's really going on? Because that in itself is a healing. Because when we listen, when we take that time to really listen to someone else, that also on a mirror level will help them like, oh yeah, it's safe for me to listen to what's really here. Because all of us are walking around on the planet busy, not feeling like we can have our truth, whether, and being bombarded, especially now that there's so much nonstop media, nonstop like internet. It's like we're constantly bombarded of, this is how you should think and feel. If you're busy as a mom, if you're busy working with other people, it's like, how do we find that space to drop into what's true for us and even feel safe enough to own that? And if there's been some trauma there, it might even be harder for you to really feel safe in owning what's true for you. Or if you're an empath where you're like, automatic is like, what do you guys want and need? So it really is, it sounds so simplistic, but if you actually practice it, it's like, oh my God, like I didn't realize that it's actually hard to not have an agenda. So this is my question and my offering for you, of understanding, is there a time when neutrality is helpful, even with ourselves? Like, think about those times where you're angry or upset. Like, do you try to fix it? Or like, are you able to be with it and allow it? And how that might even help someone else rest in themselves, feeling that you're not pushing anything on them, that you're being soft and just being beside them. And if you'd like to learn more, I have a training that begins actually this September called Connection. It's my level 1 course. And you learn how to work both hands-on, but also remotely, which especially in this day and age, it's really fun to learn all the distance healing and remote work of working with energy with others. So contact me for more details, and I hope to see you soon. Have a beautiful, wonderful day.